Hey guys, I'm back today with a video about how to correct some mistakes from ink splatters. We're going to look at some different papers and different things that I use often. We're going to start with my accent opaque white paper. This is a paper from Amazon that's really heavy duty. I use this sometimes when I'm doing embossing folders and things like that. And I put some Altenew crisp ink in different colors, so a color family. I did blush, rouge, and crimson. And then at the bottom of the paper, I put some Distress Oxide ink. And then we're going to look at some different ways that you can get rid of these. I want you to make sure, if you have not yet, please subscribe to my channel, hit like on the video, and make sure to click through the description for links to all the things that I use in this. We're going to start with this. It is Couture Creations. It's got a little eraser on the end, and it's motorized, which is really cool. It takes a couple of batteries, I think two AA's or AAA's. And I know that it's hard to see these ink marks, so I'll make sure I zoom in as much as possible. But I am a little bit of a stickler for making sure to get these off of my paper. And usually they're not quite this big, but I don't like having these ink marks on there. So I'm going to try some different things. I feel like the ink really sinks into this thick cardstock. This is not a cardstock I usually use for ink blending, and I feel like it really sits on there. So I'm going to go over each of the inks with this eraser. It definitely lightens the ink, but you can still see the marks. So we're going to try a different eraser. This is the Tombow Mono Eraser. It's more like a sand paper almost. It's got a rough edge to it, so if you get too aggressive with it, you're going to tear the paper up. But it definitely works well, and even when I'm scooping things off like this, I can see a little bit of color coming off. So it does also, it doesn't completely take it away, but it definitely lessens the mark. The last thing I'm going to try is technically not an eraser, but I've used this often, and for small areas it tends to work. This is my Jelly Roll pen. It's the size number 10, which is the biggest of the sizes, and I'm going to color over where I still see ink. When I'm doing this with some of the darker colors, a lot of times it still shows through, almost like the ink is getting colored from the ink that's on the paper. And so I feel like this works the best with a lighter ink. And of all of the options, this really lightens it the best. I don't know if you can see that right there, but it definitely lightens it more. Although to me, all of that is still visible. I try to put different light on it so you can see that up close. Still pretty good results. Next, we're going to try our Distress Oxide inks on this accent white paper. Now, Distress Oxide inks sit on top of the paper. They're not sinking in like a pigment ink. So these to me are easier to remove. I did use a pretty dark color on white, so it's not going to get completely gone. But when I'm erasing, I'm getting color on my eraser. So if I kept on doing that, I think it would work. I do think on this one, the Mono Sand Eraser, because it's on the top of the paper, kind of sands it off. And my extra pieces of this sand eraser were turning pink also. So I feel like that works some. It's still such a dark spot, and this accent paper is so, I feel like, absorbent that I'm not sure it's going to make a huge difference. If you've got a big mark, you may have to just cover that up with something. And lastly, I'm going to use my Jelly Roll pen in the size 10 like I did earlier over this Distress Oxide ink. I feel like this works okay, but you got to remember that Distress Oxide ink is sitting on top of the paper, and if I'd let it dry longer, I don't know. Right at first it looks great, but it does start to turn that ink pink, so it just becomes a lighter pink over time, which is not satisfactory for me. Next, I wanted to try this on the paper that I use most. It's Neenah Solar White. It's an 80 pound, and that's what I use for most of my ink blending. So I thought I would check it out on this. I'm going to use the same inks, the Altenew Crisp inks, which are pigment inks, and I'm using 3 different colors. And then I'm also going to use Distress Oxide ink in the same color I used previously. I know this is a smaller sheet, but I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit so you can see. I'm going to start with my eraser tool. I do want to show you the eraser needed to be changed, and I thought I would show you how easy that is, because sometimes with tools I'm a little overwhelmed at like what parts are gonna start not working and that kind of thing. So I'm gonna show you that with this one too. Okay, so you can see I'm running out of eraser. So I'm going to have to change it so that I can do this. And what you do, there's a little piece of plastic right here that you pull out, and it's down in this, so it's kind of hard for me to get my fingernails in there. So I ended up using one of my like picker type tools that I get dyes out of, and that worked great. It fits perfectly in there, and I can scoot the eraser up. So they come with a lot of refill erasers, which I could have put in there, but I knew this one still had plenty of good use for it. So that's all you do is slip that part out, put it right back in. I'm going to go ahead and erase all of the different inks on this, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you it doesn't do a whole lot. It makes it slightly lighter. Maybe if you had a little bitty area at work, but it's not the best. This mono eraser does a much better job. I feel like it does a better job on the Neenah Solar White than it did on the Accent. It's still, if you got a big mark, you need to come up with a new option because you can't just erase without tearing up your paper. Like I could erase this for a little while, and you can see that eraser is actually, the bits of it are actually pink. So you know it's coming off. It's just a matter of how much can you erase and not tear up the paper. So we've got these as options for sure, but they're not going to be perfect. They do work better on this paper than the other one. So let's try our Jelly Roll pen and make sure that works. So we're going to try this Jelly Roll pen, and I will say, of course, I've erased and sanded and done all kinds of things before I put it on these colors, which makes a big difference. And that's definitely a tip, that if you're going to use the Jelly Roll to try to cover it up, try erasing first. It makes your image already start to be lighter, and then you do a better job. It definitely works best on dye inks versus pigment inks. The dye inks have already sunk into the paper, and that pigment ink, I can still see the pink down there from the Distress Oxide. So it definitely works better with that. I don't think I'd even try the white Jelly Roll on Distress Oxide ink. It's just not going to work, and I think you're going to have better luck sanding that off completely or down enough that you're not going to notice it. So let's move on to a different technique and see what you think about it. So for this one, I want to show you what I'm trying to correct. You'll see I've got ink on the background of this, and I knew that was likely to happen because I embossed first and then I stamped my colors. I did that because I wanted to make sure I filled the area really well. So my next tip, which I just popped up here and I'll pop up again, is to color your background with alcohol inks. When you're doing this with a dark color especially, you can easily fade that in. You will never notice. So this is quite an undertaking to color in a background, but it really creates some cool looks. I love doing a dark gray, especially with this light pastel. It'll really make it pop. And when I'm doing this, you need to make sure you can actually harm the edges of your Copic markers or your alcohol markers with embossing. So you want to go right up to the line, but you don't want to cover the line. You also could possibly change the color of it if you were covering up the actual embossed line that's there. So be careful with that. I usually kind of outline things and then take a bigger stroke and try to color it in. And with alcohol markers, I feel like at least 2 coats usually does a really good job sinking into the paper and giving you an even look. But something about color in the background, sometimes it's nice for it not to be completely even. It kind of gives some shadows and some depth. So I'm going to speed this up now that I've told you the tip that I do, and I'm going to show you what the final project looked like. Here's what that looks like final. It's a Copic C7 that I used on the background. It matches the slate colored gray that I've been using with this set of cards that I've made. So it looks awesome. And I like that some parts are dark and some parts are a little bit light. I just think that gives it interest. So my next tip is to use embellishments. So on this card, I bet you can't tell where there is an ink smudge, but I'm going to zoom in and try to show you how easy it is to cover that up. So granted, this is a light color. If you can see that right along the bottom, I'm going to use some arrows in the next picture to show you. But I didn't cover up completely. I just created a little triangle of embellishments, and on the full card, it looks amazing. Here it is on the full card. I feel like that's not noticeable at all, and that little trio tricks your eye. So I hope you guys like this. I hope you learned something. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel and click through the links below to help support the channel. I'll see you again soon. Thanks.